When it comes to taste, everything is subjective, right? The world is full of media that most people just love, but I myself can't quite get behind. Perspective is a big factor in that subjectivity. For example, last year around this time, everyone was in a tizzy over the Marvel movie Ant-Man and the Wasp and Quantumania, citing it as a new low for the entirety of the MCU, emblematic of the goofy direct the studio had been churning out. I thought it was fun.
Thanks for thanking of me.
But then again, most of the viewing public hasn't seen an actual bad movie. To illustrate this, I took a brief glance through the beloved and respected website Rotten Tomatoes' worst of all time list, and I'm not sure titles like Mortal Kombat, Annihilation, and Fear.com deserve to be there over something like 5 Across the Eyes.
No, don't go out there! Don't go out there, she'll get you! And if she gets you, she'll kill you! And if she kills you, you're dead!
But most people haven't seen 5 Across the Eyes, good for them, so they crap on films that aren't that bad but still suck relative to their own experiences. In that vein, today's subject was long hailed as being one of the worst fighting games ever made, nay, one of the worst games ever made. In defense of the good people of 1994, Criticom wouldn't come out for another year, but Deadly Power Athlete moves dropped in 1992, and on the same consoles no less. I feel like the bar had already been set pretty low. In fact, I recall renting this title back in the day and finding it interesting enough to regret not spending more time with it. Does it deserve that level of nostalgic optimism? Well, let's open up a can of Shaq Fu and find out. I'm Eric J. Chucky, and welcome to Violent Profiles, where we discuss obscure fighting games and the rosters that define them. Before we get started, if you could bounce past from the like button to the subscribe, it'd help me slam dunk that algorithm and put this video in front of more people's faces. 3-pointer. Free throw. Basketball was huge in the 90s. Colossal. I mean, people still love the sport today, obviously, but it was so prevalent during the decade of my youth that even if you didn't really care about who won the NBA championship, you wanted a Chicago Bulls starter cap. Huge personalities like Dennis Rodman gave the sport major crossover appeal, and of course that translated into tie-in products like the inimitable first Space Jam film, the NBA Jam video game series, Charles Barkley's Shut Up and Jam, and Michael Jordan, Chaos in the Windy City.
Chaos.
Man, side note, this is one of the most fascinating video game concepts I've ever seen. I don't even want to review it. I just want to bathe in this insanity from time to time. He's got elemental basketballs. The decade couldn't go by without an entry from one of the biggest of all, and of course I'm talking about Shaq.
Right on.
Shaquille O'Neil has had a lot of interesting merchandising, from films about rapping genies that really do exist to a line of carbonated beverages I legitimately miss being on the market. Blueberry Cream Soda Shack was truly sublime. But we're not here to talk about any of those, we're here to talk about fighting games, and Shaq Fu is a fighting game with a famous basketball player in it. Developed by Delphine Software and a small slew of others for the ports, published in the US by Electronic Arts and Ocean in Europe, this is a patently ridiculous concept that could never possibly work again, and perhaps the ludicrousness of it all is why it became such a punching bag in the late 90s, with Electronic Gaming Monthly, game trailers, and even the notoriously charitable Nintendo Power jumping on the bandwagon to dunk on Shaq's button basher. Maybe it's because the SNES and Game Boy versions had 5 fewer characters than the Genesis, but the Game Gear had 1 fewer still, and the Amiga... Man, I'm not really here to talk about the Amiga. Both of the mobile ports also lost out on a few game modes, but we're here for the characters, so as you might expect, we're focusing mostly on the Genesis version of the game today. I guess Sega finally did what Nintendo didn't. What a nice change of pace. Shaquille O'Neil is a real person from the real world with a real storied career that was impressive even by the age of 22, which he was when this game came out 30 years ago. I'm old. We're not covering that, we're covering his bio in-game, which is conveniently summarized in the opening of Story Mode. See, one day, exemplary professional basketball player Shaq was in search of Pepsi Man in his native habitat and stumbled across a kung fu dojo where he met the Frogurt guy from The Simpsons. See, some little boy named Nezu has been kidnapped and is in need of saving. That's bad. But the old guy has a portal to the realm where Nezu is trapped, right in his closet. That's good. The realm is riddled with fiendish monsters though, most notably the game's main villain, Set Ra. That's bad. But the old man has been waiting for the magic one, the champion from the stars, the only one capable of saving Nezu and defeating Set Ra.
How do you know so much about me? You're scaring me. I don't have any money.
Aha, not the clip you thought I was going to use, was it? After comically misunderstanding the old man, Shaq heads off to save the boy and hopefully make it back in time for the big charity game. In this world, Shaq is a master of Shakido, not Shaq Fu, and... Oh no. This, it doesn't feel very good in my hands. It's not It's not that it's bad necessarily, but look at these incredibly well animated moves and you can perhaps get a feel for how chunky this is to control. See, Delphine Software is probably best known for games like 1991's Another World and 1992's Flashback, lauded cinematic platformers in the vein of 1989's Prince of Persia that, while genre-defining titles that would endure well into the modern era, weren't exactly celebrated for their smooth controls. Fighting games might look aggressively simple on their face to a layman. They're a beat-em-up with extra steps and fewer characters on the screen, but there's a certain finesse and precision that often gets overlooked, hiding in the frame data. Concepts that have become core to the genre like whiff punishing, cross-ups, and moves that are safe on block might not be something a casual member of the FGC thinks about when they're playing, but you can feel it when it's missing, or at least when it wasn't paid the kind of attention it deserves. Shaq Fu is a victim of this. It looks beautiful, controls fine, and there are some interesting mechanical underpinnings at work, but it's not up to snuff. What's the bar of quality for a fighter? The non-turbo version of Street Fighter 2? Mortal Kombat 2? Whatever it is, Shaq Fu doesn't hit it, but it's far from the worst game I've played on this show. Unless you go into the options menu and turn the speed up to fast. Suddenly those plodding attacks don't feel as plodding, the fluid animations get more janky, but the speed is performing at that of a decent fighting game. Not great, but not bad at all. This really doesn't apply to Shaq himself, though. He's kind of underwhelming. His punches are strangely short range for a man made of tall, and he doesn't have a jumping punch. Missed opportunity for a dunk-style animation, if you ask me. He has special moves, but they're kinda bad, and he really only throws his Shakuriken if he really feels like it. Beat the duel mode with him, which is what they call their arcade-style ladder, and you get an ending telling you to try story mode. Beat that, and Shaq makes it back just in time to join the charity game, only uh-oh, he's playing against the people he just fought. Oh wow, oh how wacky. This sure is the 90s. Roll credits. Next up is, hold on, I only just noticed these terribly artifacted squash pictures of Shaq's face in the SNES manual. That certainly is a design choice. Next up is Kaori, an alien martial arts champion from the planet Samotha who was forced to obey Set Ra's will by the power of an enchanted ring. She's faster and her special moves actually cooperate with my button inputs, but she lacks for reach and her jump arc is so insane that it's hard to employ effectively. She leaps clear across the screen like Cheetah from Injustice 2 every time you jump forward or back. It's too much. Win the game with her and she returns to her home planet to hide in the jungle where she's understandably paranoid and defensive. Sorry if you were hoping for more, that's all I've got. I can't imagine what else I might say about her. We'll cover Beast next, a perfect assassin created from Set Ra's shadow. He was instrumental in helping Set take over Egypt in ancient times, but both were defeated and banished to the second world where the game takes place. That's capital S, capital W. Mortal Kombat has Outworld, Beetlejuice has the Netherworld, Shaq Fu has Second World. After years of searching, Beast has finally freed his master, and the two have kidnapped Nezu to sacrifice him in a ritual that will return Set Ra to his full power. He looks cool, sort of like a demon Baraka. His normals aren't great, especially when the computer is teleport spamming me into mush with Kaori. I don't know who decided that only certain characters should have access to certain aerial moves in this game, but it was not a spectacular call. I'd feel a lot better with a reliable in for everyone. Beast's fire-breathing specials are easy to pull off and deal lots of damage though, and the computer keeps hitting me with this invisible roar move that seemed pretty devastating. Overall, a fine character. Should Beast be victorious, he cuts his losses with Set Ra and recruits a bunch of wild animals to serve under him in the jungles of Second World. That's nice. It's good to move on from toxic expectations of your parents and do your own thing. Speaking of Set, he's the first fighter in this game that feels complete. Lots of aerial options with this screw attack looking move, cool special moves like attacking with his mummy wraps, and a satisfying dash, and his normals feel both swift and impactful, and that's not on fast mode. I feel like I have control over him in the way I expect to with anyone when I pick up a fighting game. As we mentioned before, Set Ra is a heartless sorcerer who conquered Second World and began to look beyond the First World, Earth. Set deposed a pharaoh and secretly took his place while disguised as him, but the pharaoh's son Ahmet saw through his clever disguise. Joining forces with his grandfather Laotsu, a hermit monk, and a coven of wizards, they banished Set Ra back to Second World. Of course, it's taken until 1994 for Set Ra to muster his power and give the whole First World domination thing another go, so he's pretty upset. The final step to break his containment is to sacrifice a child of royal blood, the kidnapped Nezu. Should Shaq fail and Set succeed, the Second World sorcerer stalks Earth in an ever-shifting disguise, making power plays to set things up for him to take what he sees as his rightful throne. I don't know if our next character's name is Colonel, or that's his rank and he doesn't give his name, or what's going on here, but he's described as a celestial champion. Beast discovered Colonel nearly dead on an obscure battlefield as the sole survivor of a fierce struggle and convinced him to help out Set Ra. Not hunted on why Colonel agrees. should you beat duel mode with him, he just goes back to space to hang out with his scientist brother and conquer other worlds with all their sick cybernetics. Perhaps Colonel was just that grateful to have been saved by Beast. Maybe they thought he was the prophesied champion that turned out to be American basketball player Shaquille O'Neil, and in the confusion he just decided to hang out and be homies until he could get unstranded from Second World? Maybe Set Ra just agrees that cybernetics are cool, and that's all the excuse Colonel needs to kick some ass. I wouldn't mind a bizarre cartoon series or bad tie-in movie to explain some of this deep lore. I think that would have been fun. Currently, he's the second best feeling character I've played after Set, but he's a bit stiffer and less flexible. His two main special moves suck, a punch combo that's activated with a kick for whatever reason, and a hail of gunfire with a wind-up so huge as to be suboptimal. His little spinning grenade missile, however, is aces. Comes out pretty quick, has a confusing arc to mess with your opponent. I like it. He also has a jumping lightsaber strike like Luke in the SNES Return of the Jedi game, so yeah, pretty solid all around. Longshoreman Diesel is kind of the inverse of Colonel. His normals are stiff and underwhelming, but two of his special moves are so slick and comboable that they're really fun to abuse. The instant transmission uppercut and the knife throw. I'm not really sure why he's here. There's nothing in his bio about encountering Beast or Set Ra and making a deal with them. He just works hard hauling crates and fights harder. If you use him to defeat Set, he decides to become a hermit in the woods of Second World. What a strange man. Leotsu the Wise is a grandmaster martial artist who apparently is still alive despite being instrumental in banishing Set Ra into a rune-encrusted pyramid deep within Second World back in ancient Egypt times. He fights with a staff that gives him some really impressive reach, utilizes his ki for fireballs and such, and has a proper ninja kick style cross-up, which isn't as good here as it is in other games, but still brings my hop-kicking heart joy. Victory, of course, means that Leotsu serves his great-great-great-grandson, Nezu, and becomes the eternal guardian of the Second World. The game says he does this because he's weary of the dangers that keep emerging from it. This is one of those malapropisms that usually gets under my skin. The word you typically want to use there is wary. But here, it can actually kind of work either way. Leotsu is either aware that Second World can be very dangerous, so he serves as its gatekeeper, or he's so tired of this crap happening that he's determined to personally stop it if it ever crops up again. Our next combatant is the mystic swordsman Raja, who is ensorcelled by Set Ra's magic while exploring the nether planes in astral form. Damn, that actually sounds pretty sick. A conflicted character who Shaq thinks he can recruit if he can detach Raja's spirit from Set Ra's hold, and then he finds out he's kind of an asshole who just loves to fight and be the best, but Raja still helps out Shaq because Set Ra took advantage of him. Man, that's pretty cool. But enough editorializing. Raja has potential with some really potent normals that keep up the pressure. I couldn't utilize his specials well, but the computer does. You've no doubt seen him kicking my ass a few times now. I'm certain part of it is me not being the best Shaq Fu player, but the game's AI is also notoriously overtuned to take ample advantage of the CPU's precision timing. Regardless, I wish Raja used those swords a little more outside of his special moves, but overall he's a fine addition to the roster. Win the game with him and he returns to his life of luxury, keeping his magical and martial skills top tier for the next glorious tournament. If you've been paying attention, Nezu is the kidnapped kid and linchpin around which this entire game revolves, despite the name of it being Shaq Fu and not Nezu Kwando. You may have also noticed he beats the ever-loving shit out of me every time I fight him. Look, the kid's got great normals and some of the best combo-ish attacks the game has to offer. His small size makes him an awkward target, he's fast, but as though that weren't enough, he has this BS key trap freeze move that basically means he gets a bunch of free hits on you. And those hits are usually fireballs, and that's usually enough to kill me. I'm gonna pretend I'm the Nezu in the black gi for this one so I can feel good about all the lunch I'm taking here. Yeah, look at me go. I'm good at fighting games. Win the game with Nezu and he just keeps training under his granddad Leotsu. Not that he needs it, this kid's basically Goku. Honestly, I feel like Shaq wasn't needed here. He could have never wandered into that old dude's kung fu store and Nezu would have just time froze Set Ra and Beast before stomping a mud hole through them and walking out dry.
What?
I said I don't think Nezu needed Shaq's help to...
What?
Stop that. It's obnoxious. Our next fighter, Mephis, is sick. The manual describes him as a mighty undead sorcerer and Set Ra's former apprentice, but what they don't mention is he's a freaking kung fu master. I spotted more famous martial arts moves in his normals than anyone else on the roster. What a satisfying dude to play. And if that weren't enough, he shoots lightning, throws Michael Jackson sparkles, and is in possession of the juiciest of rips. Mephis rules. His story turns out to be more complicated than initially described, however. I'm noticing this trend of Set Ra being really bad at making friends, so instead he crimps people into his servitude, and Mephis is no different. Defeating Set Ra ends the undead curse that has been put upon him, returning him to his natural state as the father of our next character.
Voodoo, running for my magic.
Voodoo's actually not great. I'd put her on par with Shaq maybe, but then again I'm not so sure. She has some really creative special moves, like summoning an eagle to strike her enemies, causing an earthquake, and whipping out a voodoo doll to stab and injure her opponent no matter where they are on screen. But the startup for all of them is so long she's open to basically any counter and unlikely to complete the move. Her normals aren't bad. Nothing to write home about like Colonel, who the game appropriately threw me up against for her opening fight. The story frames Voodoo as a powerful magician and ally of Set Ra, but if that's the case, why would Mephis being her dad be a surprise? In her ending, Mephis survives and Voodoo cures him of his zombification, studying sorcery under his tutelage. Wouldn't she already have that experience? Was Set Ra keeping pointless secrets? This game makes me want to write a better, more detailed version of its story. I want to write Shaq Fu fanfiction in 2024. What is wrong with me? Finally, we have Auroch, who's got one hell of a look going. What do the kids say? His drips are rizful? I'm sure that's it. He's a simple outlaw who loves fighting and is one of the most fun characters in this game. His aerial turns him into a giant spiked ball like he's Kirby in Smash Brothers. He can swing a huge flail at you, throw boomerangs, and he has a teleport punch. This guy's normals are so damn good, he doesn't need a teleport punch, but there it is. Win the game with Auroch and he takes his winnings from the tournament? I guess that's how they're framing the duel ladder. First I've heard of any prize money. Regardless of how he got it, this Don Corneo looking scumbag uses his reward to start a tournament palace where it's all fighting all the time. I gotta respect that. There's a lot more to this game than initially meets the eye. There are semi-secret bonus fights in the story mode, one against a blue version of Beast, another against Set Ra with black bandages, and a third against a bunch of skeleton dudes that pop out of the ground. There's a code to turn on blood, and a few fatalities that have been discovered for certain characters while this code is active. I didn't really get into it, but there's two kinds of blocks, the traditional hold back and hope for the best, and an energy shield block that can be activated using the move boost button. There are taunts, a couple of attacks that can be cancelled, though it's speculated this might actually be a glitch, and there's a whole fury meter system that seems to be implemented as kind of a comeback mechanic, where you become immune to being stunned and deal a little extra damage, and each character has a different rate at which their fury meter fills. Why all the hate if this game is so cool? In a word, bugs. Shaq Fu is not fun to play against the arcade. As I said earlier, their AI is too tight. They can break out of stun almost instantly, and the moves which are programmed with questionable timing for us meat people with controllers can be executed so expertly as to discourage play by the computer. I asked earlier what the bar for acceptable in fighting games is, and while we haven't answered that question, I think we've determined Shaq Fu is just south of it. The greater shame is how unnecessarily game journalists bullied it into oblivion. A sequel could have been brilliant, taking what they learned and building on that same engine to achieve a better version of the original. There was supposed to be a Shaq Fu 2, but it barely entered the pre-production stage when it got canned. Very little intel exists on what might have been, except for this sketch of a potential roster, including a lot of returning fighters. What else is there to say about this game? It was originally supposed to be called Shaq Attack. I feel like that was a missed opportunity, but at the same time can't imagine a timeline where we don't have the inimitable oddity and cultural prevalence of the term Shaq Fu. The game had a sequel/revival in 2018 called Shaq Fu: A Legend Reborn, which was also not well received. Will I be covering this crowdfunded beat-em-up on the channel at a later date? No. Absolutely not. It'll be ridiculous. This show's called Fighting Profiles after all. I could never feature something that isn't a fighting game. The mistreatment of Shaq Fu has left me so upset I want to play Mace the Dark Age to cleanse my palate. Or maybe Time Killers. If only there was something that felt like the marriage of both. I guess we'll find out next time on Violent Profiles. Don't forget to hit up our Patreon at the $5 tier. Like all the names currently on screen, your name will join them, and you'll get new episodes a whole month early. Until next time, white out.